When Vladimir Putin sits down to address the Russian people, he doesn't just talk about politics or economics, he talks about the 9th century. In July 2021, he published a 5,000-word essay titled On the Historical Unity of Russians and Ukrainians. It wasn't a diplomatic memo, it was a historical argument, and it laid the groundwork for an invasion 7 months later. Putin opens his speeches by reaching back to Kyivan Rus, a medieval federation that centered on the city of Kyiv from the 9th to the 13th centuries. In 2009, President Medvedev created a commission to combat what he called falsifications of history to the detriment of Russia's interests. It was, in effect, the state declaring ownership over the past. And by 2023, the Kremlin had imposed a single official history textbook for all Russian schools, written by Vladimir Medinsky, the same man who led negotiations with Ukraine. The textbook devotes about a third of its pages to World War II, but Stalin's repressions and the Gulag get just 8 pages out of nearly 1,000. The authors, well, they describe the Gulag system as a tool that helped the USSR achieve what they call economic independence through mobilization of human resources. The Soviet invasion of Finland in 1940 is explained as necessary because the border was, quote, only 32 kilometers from Leningrad. The 1968 crackdown in Czechoslovakia, we're told, was needed because democratic reforms caused an internal crisis, actively promoted by the West. This is what Russian students learn, not complexity, not tragedy, just justification. Now, let's apply this framework to Ukraine. Putin's argument, which he repeats constantly, is that Ukraine is not a real country. He claims that modern Ukraine was created by the Bolsheviks and that it has no legitimate history outside the Russian story. But, this really ignores centuries when Ukrainian lands were part of Poland-Lithuania, when Cossack hetmans made treaties with multiple powers, and when a distinct Ukrainian identity survived despite imperial repression. Putin selectively uses figures like Bohdan Khmelnytsky, the Cossack leader who allied with Moscow in 1654, as proof that Ukrainians always wanted to be Russian. Yet, he ignores Ivan Mazepa, the Cossack hetman who fought against Peter the Great and died in exile, who is now a hero to many Ukrainians. In 2017, Putin told a French audience that Anne of Kyiv, who became Queen of France in the 11th century, was Russian. Anne was born in Kyiv, the daughter of Yaroslav the Wise. She lived 4 centuries before Moscow was a significant power. Still, in Putin's telling, her legacy belongs to Russia. In 2014, after annexing Crimea, Putin argued that because Prince Vladimir was baptized in Chersonesus, the peninsula has sacred ties to Russia. A religious event from 988 became a justification for 21st century conquest. The Crimean annexation speech in 2014 laid out the template. Putin told Russians that Crimea was our common history, our common roots, and that the collapse of the USSR was a major geopolitical disaster. Then came 2022. On February 21st, Putin gave another speech. He called Ukraine an inalienable part of our own history, culture, and spiritual space. He promised to denazify Ukraine. That word was chosen carefully. For Russians, Nazism is the ultimate evil. Comparing Ukrainians to Nazis is the ultimate delegitimization. The term denazification comes from post-1945 Germany, when the Allies tried to purge Nazi influence from German society. Ukraine does have far-right elements. Every European country does. But to call a government led by Volodymyr Zelensky, who is Jewish, a Nazi regime is a distortion so extreme it becomes propaganda. Putin also claimed that Ukraine was committing genocide against Russian speakers in the Donbass. International monitors found no evidence of this, but evidence doesn't matter when you control the narrative. What Putin has done is turn history into ammunition. He has created a version of the past, where Russia is always the victim, always the defender, always entitled to what it claims. Serious historians understand that nations are complex, identities shift, borders change. The past does not dictate the present unless we let it. But when a leader with nuclear weapons decides that his interpretation of the 10th century justifies killing in the 21st, complexity becomes a casualty. The Kremlin's history is not about understanding, it's about control. If you control the past, you control the future. And if you control the future, you can justify anything. Putin's speeches are not lectures, they are weapons. And they are aimed at the very idea that Ukraine has a right to exist. Subscribe to War Machiner and share this if you value history that goes deeper.